Welcome everybody to Farming Fast and Slow. My name is Adam Wolf and I'm joined with Len Coop and Nick Andrews of Oregon State. And we're going to be talking about their IPM portal, uspest.org, but it's a lot more than that. And we're going to dive into really so much of the history of how they developed it and what's for the future. But I just wanted to start off with a little bit of housekeeping. So we're going to talk for about a half an hour. Feel free to write any questions you have bubbling up in the Q&A section at the bottom of this portal or this Zoom screen. And then the last 15 minutes or so, take questions. As usual, you can find this and all of our other past episodes on arable.com/farmingfastandslow. And we post these on YouTube, edited and condensed, or maybe barely condensed, maybe some of my preamble condensed, but anyhow, so you'll be able to find these forever. I also want to call out next week, we will have our first Spanish language episode of the show where Walter will be interviewing Felix from Cabur. Let me grab his last name, Felix Casabal, sorry. So I'm excited for this. So I got interested in what Nick and Len were doing because we had this kind of funny question. It was from somebody who had kind of farm planning software, and he had a customer who wanted to grow cauliflower for a major grocer. And then what the grocer wanted, if this person was going to be a vendor, was consistency. You know, I need cauliflower every week. And so in turn, the farmer has to be figuring out, well, when ought I to plant in order to meet this kind of production guideline? And then you get back to the seeds that are provided, and often they're kind of poorly constrained. They might have days to harvest, which, you know, most of us think about harvest timing is driven by thermal time, so degree days and not calendar days. And so that helped me find all the crop time models of Nick Andrews, and those are, you know, implemented and available within the uspest.org platform that Len Coop developed. And so that kind of led me to this comprehension of, gosh, digital agriculture is really going from, you know, the consumer to the retailer to the farmer to the seed company. And of course, you know, underpinning it is all of the kind of university level research that, you know, can give us such a thing as a pest model or a, you know, crop growth model, and combine it with, you know, cooperative weather networks and gridded data. So I really kind of love this as one of the premier examples of how digital agriculture brings everybody together as these actors in the supply chain. And so, but I honestly, I know we've talked in the past, but I don't know your titles, your affiliation. I just know the products of your work. So I wonder if you could give an introduction to yourselves. And Nick, I should unmute. Okay, perfect.
I could go first. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Len Coop, and I'm an associate professor of practice at Oregon State University. And I'm both in the departments of horticulture and part of the Oregon IPM Center, which was newly reformed a few months ago. And so I've been part of the Oregon IPM Center for quite a long time, decades now, and been mostly working on grant projects, soft money. Until recently, I've gotten some state support. But I was trained here at Oregon State as an entomologist and got my master's and PhD degrees here. And early on, I started modeling as one of my main gigs, and started with complicated models that nobody ended up using unless I figured out a way to distribute them myself. And so I thought what we really need are some start simple, and the most challenging thing and the most productive type of model that I could envision were all weather driven. And so we created uspest.org in order to tie together weather networks with models that are mostly all published, or they're synthesized from published and unpublished data. So it's all science-based, and it's all documented, if not all peer-reviewed, published. At least it's out there in the public sphere.
I've noticed this, that you give like an authority for every single model. I've spent a lot of time with the insect models, and that for me has been, you know, an internal driver. I really want all of our work to be science-based, and I think it's just essential to be able to trace back, like, where did we get this knowledge, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Nick Andrews, and I've been with OSU Extension since 2005. I'm also an associate professor of practice, which is kind of a unique rank at OSU. And I'm a member of the Center for Small Farms and Community Food Systems. So from 2005 to 2019, I was the metro area small farms extension agent around the Portland, Oregon area. And in January 2020, I took a new statewide position as an organic vegetable extension agent. And that's part of a new organic extension program that we're starting at OSU. And then I got involved with the degree day modeling. I used them, well, I did my undergraduate degree in horticulture at OSU, and then I went to England and did my master's in entomology at the University of Reading, and I worked for the extension service over there. It's called ADAS. It's been privatized since then. And I used degree day models a lot in my entomology work in England, working with vegetable growers, and then came back here to the US and again used degree day models as an orchard tree fruit consultant in Hood River. And then when I started as extension faculty at OSU, about 5 years or 6 years into my position, Len Coop and I started to collaborate. And he actually taught me how to develop degree day models, and we just kind of gone from there.
I love this aha moment that you described, Len, around simple but useful. Because, you know, we started off, you know, with this device, and, you know, I've got this PhD in biology, and I spent a lot of time writing up like really complicated land surface models. So I was thinking, like, what's the most exotic and sophisticated and elegant type of work we could do to be modeling, I don't know, xylem, water potential, you know, under cavitation, you know, like, all this stuff. And then, you know, what people are asking for is like, well, could you like at least give me degree days? And I thought, oh, degree days, what's so complicated about degree days? Like, can't you do that already? And the thing that kind of hit me was actually, as a data synthesis problem, it's really complicated, because you've got, you know, maybe a physical station, maybe you need to go back historically to fill in any gaps with gridded data, and then, you know, you've got a short-term high-resolution forecast, but then degree day models, you really want to extend for the season. You know, we got 2-3 months, and that's beyond the weather prediction kind of window. Yeah. And wow, now you got a lot of moving parts, not to mention the model itself, you know? So yeah. How much, like, was, when you started and saying, okay, people want simple but useful. How much of the pie did you try to eat at once? I don't know if that's the right metaphor, but how did you like approach this?
Well, I didn't invent the idea of having online degree day models, but sometimes I feel like I did, but I inherited a bulletin board system that my former boss had developed, and that was part of his job as a professor of entomology. So people would, they would call up the state climatologist and get the degree days for the last week and then add them up on a spreadsheet or their tablet. And they would, make their assessments and look up in the table what they need to know. So the first step was kind of to automate that and put it on the web once the World Wide Web became a thing. For me, it started in 1996. And so that's pretty early on. There wasn't a whole lot happening in agriculture a couple of years before that on the web yet. And so we just gradually built and did it all with grant funds. And one of the first things we did was we tried to spatialize models and make maps. And now 25 years later, degree day mapping is becoming more commonplace. And so like we partnered with the USA National Phenology Network, and they are the best product arm of degree day mapping right now, even though US Pest has had them for all these years, since at least 1997. And we had some nice grants to develop those products. We didn't really promote them heavily, and we didn't really see the use case for them. So sometimes we're a little ahead of our time.
Right, that you made them because they were cool to make, but you didn't necessarily have a use.
Well, we've been driven by the grant funding system, and that requires innovating. And of course, now more and more you document a demand from end users in what you propose. But 25 years ago, it was really technology and cool ideas that was driving funding. And so like we had a map of the date of codling moth egg hatch in an area-wide codling moth program proposal. And we're still promoting that idea of using dates of events as the primary mapping product today. And so we've just submitted a recent proposal doing the modern version of that. It has evolved and it has improved, but it's still basically the same idea that sometimes it takes decades to find the end users and to marry the right technologies together.
It's crazy to hear this timeline. I was developing an insect, actually literally a codling moth hatch and flight model based on your work, and presented it to a user who's based in the Central Valley of California. And it was like, nah, this is like not quite right. It's like, on the one hand, there's all this biology that I'm not using. On the other hand, it's not telling me the thing I need to know, which is like when I have to deal with it. She eventually dug up this sheet that was provided by the same type of person who you're talking about with the bulletin board system, which was from 2008. And I don't know how it is that she kept it, and it was in a 3-ring binder. And it was, like this whole schedule of when codling moth was with these kind of manual biofix things. And I was struck by, the reality, we're always hit over the head with how people have already done everything that we can imagine doing, and maybe even decades ago. Yeah, just sort of ultimately the simplicity of using the coddling moth map. It could be, you know, as you described, you know, you did this, what, 20 years ago? And yet it's still kind of a fundamentally useful part of the platform.
Yeah, it can take a long time for simple ideas to catch on and become widely used. And so like, and simplifying the implementation or the platform is the key. You know, so there's research, and then there's implementation, and then there's extension. So you can have an elegant implementation, but if it's not promoted and extended and shared widely, like through your efforts here with these webinars, then very little adoption happens. So that's kind of why Nick and I joined together and with others created the Crop Time program to help vegetable growers and seed companies work with something a little bit better than a daily, you know, days to maturity type listing. And so if we can publish and promote degree day models for vegetable varieties, then I think it's a huge step forward. Even though the idea is not new, the adoption is lagging.
Yeah, so Nick, how does that play out in terms of, you know, you're talking about doing consulting on, you know, tree farms and working a lot with growers giving advice. And then is that where Crop Time came from, is just kind of recognizing the types of questions that are being faced by the small farmers?
Yeah, when I started working with vegetable growers at OSU, it was kind of glaring to me that we did have a few vegetable pest models that were available to growers, but vegetable growers in Oregon really weren't using degree day models like the orchardists were. And I think because there just wasn't a critical mass of useful management information that they could get yet from degree day models. And I was working closely with David Brown from Mustard Seed Farms early on, and he had developed, a very busy farmer, kind of guy that hardly ever goes to conferences, but was very quantitative with the way he did things. And he had developed his own degree day models for his vegetable varieties for exactly the reason that you discussed in your opening remarks, because he wanted to have consistent supply for wholesale buyers. And if he was later than expected, he wanted to be able to give them a confident explanation of why he was late and when his crops would be ready. And so looking at the models that he developed by hand, I took that to Len and we decided we could make it a lot easier. He was really an inspiration. If he was adopting degree day technology with a max min thermometer on his porch and, a hand calculator, we could easily improve on that. And that's how we got a Western SARE Research and Education grant in 2012 to develop Crop Time. And we worked with, larger wholesale farmers and also small scale direct market farmers that were trying to keep their CSA supplied, or, maybe they'd have a contract to grow sweet corn for a wedding or, something like that. And they also wanted to know with a little bit more accuracy what their harvest dates would be. There was a general acknowledgement amongst growers that the days to maturity information in the catalog was relatively useless, except it was useful in that it would indicate the relative time to maturity of two different varieties in the same catalog, but it didn't give them a reliable absolute time to maturity. So we worked with a group of seed company representatives and farmers and identified, I think it was about a dozen crops that we wanted to develop degree day models for. Over the grant funded period, we collected all of the degree day data with from on-farm observations and experiment station observations. And then since then, we've been trying to crunch the model data and generate the models. And that's, extension agents always have a lot of different things going on. So being able to focus on that modeling has been a challenge since the grant ended, but we are getting more and more models online. We don't have a cauliflower model for that grower you were working with, but we do have the data to develop them. So hopefully cauliflower and kale and cabbage models will be coming soon. We've had the broccoli models online for a few years now.
The broccoli models is what I first discovered, and I actually love all the documentation around it, where you're giving, the errors in terms of a couple days, and it shows kind of performance characteristics.
Right.
I mean, I dream, and it's actually interesting that you brought up earlier the National Phenology Network, because I think of as being one of the preeminent citizen science efforts in America, if not the world, and I think of it as mostly lilac bloom and, things that are more, it's called non-agricultural phenology. But it strikes me as being a model of, if you were able to get planting and harvest from a large number of people, and hopefully along a consistent set of varieties, you should be able to kind of automate the learning, reverse engineer the degree day requirements by virtue of having this relatively large data set, as distinct from running these highly precise temperature measurements on farm. I'm just curious, kind of, to what extent have you thought about collecting kind of more volunteer-driven, it's called planting and harvest data, phenology, crop phenology data, in order to kind of ease the number crunching part of it?
Yeah, well, one of the challenges that we came across at the beginning, when I wrote the grant, I kind of assumed that we would have readily available growth stage descriptions. And what eventually, I couldn't find anything in the first year of the project, really, but then we did find the BBCH monograph, growth stages of mono and dicotyledonous plants. And so by the second year of the project, we were using those growth stage descriptions, but those were pretty botanical growth stage descriptions. And we had, for farmers marketing broccoli or cauliflower or whatever, we did have to tweak or adapt those growth stage descriptions to match, a good harvest date. And I think that would be a challenge with sort of getting a lot of different people collecting the data, is just getting consistency in how do you define the harvest date. And, that's more difficult in some crops than others, of course.
That's interesting. And I share your observation around BBCH as a phenological descriptor, because, the kind of agronomic use, let's say corn, we've got our V1, V2, VT, R1, onward. But if you go to BBCH, you've got all these kind of numerical codes that are probably publishable, but nobody uses them unless you're a scientist. And so if we want to get people's observations from the field, we have to use what people observe, and people observe what is practical, So if we're talking wine grapes, they look at veraison or bloom or whatnot. Anyhow, so this kind of disconnect, if you're drawing from citizenry, has this kind of practical import of defining the types of observations we get to work with.
Yeah.
That remains a challenge we really haven't tried to tackle, and we haven't seen anybody else tackle citizen science to collect crop phenology data. We tried it with crop time, and we we pretty much gave up and decided we needed stricter controls over the protocols to make sure that we were collecting all the same types of data.
I could see that.
Nick can describe the process if that's what we should be talking about, but I'm not sure.
I think that was definitely a big challenge. And in the second and third year of the project, we settled on mainly collecting growth development data from variety trials, because, you know, spending hours and hours driving from farm to farm, it was nice to have the different locations, but we could run variety trials at different experiment stations in different places in the valley, and, you know, collect data for dozens of varieties at one stop. So I think that the citizen science thing, it would take some thought, but I think there's definitely a lot of potential to increase collaboration with seed companies. You know, a lot of seed companies are collecting days to maturity information anyway, and they live near an automatic weather station that we can tap into that data from, you know, Len's US Pest system, and they're professional horticulturists as well. So, you know, if we've got clearly defined growth stages, I could really see that sort of collaboration in the future.
I mean,
the other big challenge, though, has been the actual modeling step. You know, I'm not the brightest guy in the world when it comes to computers and data crunching and things. So, you know, some people might be quicker at the modeling than I am, but I think there's a lot of potential for us to, and Len and I have been talking about this for a while, maybe trying to get a grant to automate some of the modeling, because there's no real reason. I think, you know, if we had some, there is some software. DJ Pheno was developed by scientists in Montreal, and I tried using that for a little while, but I wasn't able to wrap my head around it. But I think some sort of software development to speed up the modeling process would be a game changer.
I mean, that's what I spend my days doing, is writing, you know, if one was to do it, here's how one would do it, you know, but often I'm not the one holding the phenology data. I'm the one holding all the weather data. And so it remains this kind of two-body problem, which is, okay, well, how do we, you know, join up? And we talked to, I have to say, I love the seed industry. And we talked to a lot of really innovative companies that are thinking a lot about how do we, you know, create digital recipes so that our guidelines of what to expect when you put this on your field are based on, you know, station data, you know, controlled conditions. And yet, all that stuff is crazy proprietary. So, you know, we're trying to get a bunch of corn phenology to make, you know, a feature in the product. And yet you can't just like knock on the door and say, hey, can you like share with me all of your growth stage models? You know, so it is like you're working with, you know, extension bulletins, basically the type of work that you did. You know, even for a commodity as valuable as corn, grown on as many acres as corn, it's still not that widespread. And so I'd love to see, you know, because it's kind of a public good, you know, a greater sort of cooperative investment between, you know, people developing the genetics and people with the weather's, you know, data to estimate the model. And then you got people who are using it, you know. We named this year within Arable the International Phenological Year, IPY. And so we've got a lot of efforts, like the number one question, if we talk to somebody, hey, like, how do we work together? My answer is like, please collect growth stage information, you know? So I'm curious, I kind of love talking about the evolutionary dead ends, or like things we tried that didn't work. you know, in terms of like, gosh, this is really difficult because everybody calls the same growth stage something different, or we wanted to gather it in situ on farm, but you know, that was a lot of driving. I'm curious about the types of feedback you've gotten from users on the digital platform that has shaped how you've evolved it, you know, and guided the direction or priority list.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit and hand it over to Len, but we did some usability testing when we were developing the crop time interface, because the previous models that Len had were mainly insect and disease models. So, you know, scheduling planting and harvest dates was a different application. One of the things that the growers said they definitely wanted was more than one start date, so that they could model the maturity of, you know, several plantings at once. So just because of the limits of screen width and things like that, we limited it to 4 planting dates, but that was a new thing. We also developed a Google interface for finding the weather stations. So that made it easier for people to zoom in on a map to find a weather station near their farm. And there's a couple of ideas that have come out of the workshops and usability testing that we did that we haven't been able to implement yet, but we'd like to in the future. One was giving growers the opportunity to enter an end date and have the model predict the planting date. You know, so the grower enters their desired harvest date, and then the model tells them when they should plant in order to achieve that. You know, they can do that now iteratively, you know, by trial and error, but that was an interesting insight. So hopefully we'll be able to do that at some point. And then with vegetable varieties, one of the big challenges is just how many new vegetable varieties there are all the time, and how do we handle, you know, modeling for all of those. So Len's got some ideas that we might, if we can get a grant in the future, where we might be able to use sort of relative days to maturity and make those degree day sensitive. So if you've got a catalog that says Arcadia broccoli is, you know, 82 days to maturity or whatever it says, and then they've got the variety that you're growing and they say it's 95 days to maturity, then we would be, based on the Arcadia model and the threshold temperatures, we would be able to sort of make that other new variety, you know, make kind of a spin-off degree day model from the, you know, from the varieties that we actually have modeled directly. So that, you know, that would help us, you know, they might be a little bit less accurate, you know, than, you know, custom degree day model, but
it's a sensible guess. I feel like with so many aspects of digital agriculture, you know, there's so many sensible guesses. Like if I look on the platform, it'll show me a half dozen stations near Princeton that I can, you know, and I like that when the computer localizes my search. And the same thing as you said with the relative maturity is like, well, just because I've never seen it doesn't mean I know nothing. You know, we're still a broccoli plant, and we're still like, you know, we know a little bit about how it's related to this other broccoli plant.
right.
No need to get all into Bayesian statistics to say, oh, well, I bet it is 6 days later than the other one.
Yeah, that's been our goal really, is just to try to improve on the current time to maturity information that growers had. You know, not develop the perfect model, you know, but.
Well, yeah, perfection, I feel like, is often the enemy of the adequate.
Good motto.
But I'm so curious, you know, I think, Len, you're the keeper of the usage statistics, and you probably see what pages people are touching. Is it the crop models or the insect models or the disease models, or how are people working with the platform?
Well, we've got like over 130 models, degree day models. We've got another 25 hourly weather driven models that are mostly plant disease infection risk models. So they're two separate platforms, and we have to accumulate the statistics separately. So we have a pretty good logging system for the degree day models, so I can track year to year how many hits, how many model runs we actually get. And so it varies a lot. And, you know, it's the invasive insects that seem to get the most hits, like the spotted winged Drosophila and the brown marmorated stink bug. Gypsy moth is, we have 3 different gypsy moth degree day models, depending on how you want to use it. And they all get thousands of hits per year. And then some of the newer models only get maybe a few dozen per year. And that doesn't mean they're not important or valuable to at least a few users.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we track the relative usage of each model. And I have to say the crop time models are taking a little bit more time to catch on than I would have thought. Some of them are very popular, and others have not really caught on yet. So we're learning from adoption rates about what crops do growers really want to use models to plan their timing, their scheduling for. And
Do you see a seasonal cycle of usage? You know, when are people
certainly, yeah, it's within season is when we almost always see the most usage. So yeah, our primary target is to allow within season real-time decision making. And there's less wintertime post hoc analysis or pre-planning happening. We do have our long-term forecast that goes out 7 months from the National Weather Service NMME forecast. And so that's an actual numerical model that is based on sea surface temperatures and so on, that is a science-based forecast. And so, you know, that you can actually get a pretty good prediction of what the rest of the season's going to look like. And the alternative to that would be to use a 10-year average, which is also, I think, a pretty good idea. And comparing those two forecasts, we don't see a big difference for like a corn model. There might be a two-day difference in the harvest date. So, but we had a grant to develop this longer-term numerical forecast into our platform, and we're really happy with it.
Mm-hmm.
The grant was for the NMME, bringing that in?
Yeah, because it's published at different scales. It's published at monthly average time slices. And so we have to downscale that to the daily basis.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of numerical work in managing that.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. There's an effort at University of Idaho that also has done some downscaled NMME. I find that stuff wildly useful, but underused. I wonder, in season, is it like May, June is the peak? I'm just curious for my, you know, and there might be other people like me that are developing, you know, like what is game time for the platform?
Yeah, I try not to take vacations in May or June. Things start to settle out a little bit in July and August, but April's a big month. So April through June are the key months for US pest, I would say. Mm-hmm. But in the fall, the plant disease models are more heavily used. Some of them, like late blight and but there are different seasons for different models, and so it's really almost a year-round thing. And one principle that we've always maintained is that the platform should be equally available and usable all year round.
Uh-huh.
So like you could have a training workshop or get used to a model in the off season and use it for planning or post hoc analysis. And then you're more likely to know how to use it and be ready to use it in the season when there's really very little free time.
Well, and like one of the ways that I've seen how that could play out is spraying. I know you guys are working a lot with organics, and so chemical usage might be less an object of your clients or users. But let's just say in general, people apply too much. And that can either be that they're applying when the risk is not present, or they're applying on a day which is just inappropriate to be spraying. And one of the kind of use cases for a post hoc analysis is to say, well, when did you treat? And then let's look back and see how effective that likely was, so that you can see a version of yourself that potentially saved money or got better efficacy out of your treatments. And then I feel like I want to try to bake in a learning cycle at the end of the season that actually can change behavior from for the next season. Because I think within season, it's the fog of war. Nobody is necessarily learning new stuff.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Hopefully people think that way and are using the models in that way.
Well, and like for me, I almost think, and this kind of goes back to the theme of the show, farming fast and slow. In the middle of the season, it's all fast brain. It's very reactive. You're using your gut. And then, you have no patience to look at a graph. I just know my own, cycles of when I feel like reading Tolstoy and when I'm just like browsing the news, and, there is a time of the season when you do want to look at maybe a report, but it's maybe more of a PDF. It's not, it's not a quick digestion website, so much of the digital work that we want to develop is very cotton candy. Let's make it as easy to use as possible, but like the off season, as you're saying, should be a time for digesting, like, well, what happened? What can we do better next year?
Yeah.
We have a question on the Q&A, so I want to open it up. The question is, how do you think extension will change to adapt to 21st century farming in the coming decades? And what are the barriers to change?
That one's for Nick, I think.
That's a little bit above my pay grade.
Well, you're an extension agent.
One example that I've changed that I've seen in extension at OSU from my own experience has been more engagement with the audiences that we actually have in Oregon, and greater inclusion of different types of audiences. I think that the Center for Small Farms and Community Food Systems is an example of that, but I think it's relevant to sort of any scale of agriculture. Extension's also really trying to make sure that, broadly speaking, even outside of ag extension, that we're relevant to urban audiences and relevant to a broader set of concerns. So I think that'll be an important part of it. I've sort of found, working with colleagues like Len Coop on the degree day models, and then Dan Sullivan, who's a soil scientist I've collaborated with a lot, that there's been a lot of interest in online decision tools. I think the degree day models are a good example, but Dan and I have also developed an organic fertilizer and cover crop calculator. It gives people And I think what both of those decision tools have in common is that they're giving farmers and other ag professionals access to research-based information that's relevant to their location. So there's some piece of data that's specific to their farm that's driving the predictions that we're making. And in the case of degree day models, it's the weather data. In the case of our nutrient management calculator, it's the analysis of their fertilizer or the analysis of their cover crops, and we're predicting nitrogen mineralization. So I think that computers and internet and automatic weather station networks open up a whole range of agronomic decision tools, and I think we're the people all over the world working on them, but I think there's a lot of potential there.
I mean, it's interesting what you're bringing up. There's obviously in the news right now, the backdrop, we're talking a lot about, land access, land disenfranchisement, going back to, the 19th century and, who gets land. And you're working with small farmers, so you're working intrinsically with people who are maybe growing niche things. Maybe it's for immigrant communities, whatnot. But, those are not necessarily, by definition, mainstream agriculture. And, one of the digital trends, totally separate from agriculture, is towards like mass personalization. So how do I consume some media that is relevant to me, in my community, in my, worldview? And digital, I think, offers the opportunity to reach more audiences, as you're saying, to be more inclusive. And that sounds like a world apart from, the agronomists that I talked to when I was studying agronomy in college, who were like, they helped make industrial agriculture unapologetically,
Mm-hmm.
And to start talking about small farms was just perceived as like questioning their like life's work. So I love this kind of direction that you're describing is kind of more expansive and touching more individuals.
Right. Yeah. And not so much an either or, but, more inclusion of different values and approaches. It looks like there's another question.
There's another question. You have a good eye. So are there other tools besides crop time and US Pest that you'd like to integrate with? What other departments are doing things like you? So I guess other departments might be, other institutional collaborators, but also what are the, let's call it platform integrations that exist that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, I mean, Len knows a lot more about the National Phenology Network's work, but one, just to throw it out there really quickly, some researchers at the University of Georgia and now folks at Maryland, USDA, ARS, and other folks are working on degree day sensitive nutrient management calculators or nitrogen mineralization models. And the ones that Dan Sullivan and I developed aren't driven by temperature data, but ours are easy to use, but maybe they may be accurate enough, but I think that work going on there is also really interesting. I'd like to, at some point, I think at this point, users test their cover crop residues and then they send in the results to the University of Georgia and they run the models themselves because they're a little bit more complicated to use. But I think that's a really interesting development. I'd like to keep my eye on that.
And this, are we basically talking about non-mineral?
Yeah, it's basically testing a cover crop stand to get the percent dry matter and the total percent nitrogen, and then you can use those results, enter those into a mineralization model to predict the fertilizer value of the cover crop. And the way Dan Sullivan and I have done it is basically for the Willamette Valley and Western Washington, and we think it's relevant to more areas around the country, but it's not degree day sensitive or temperature sensitive or moisture sensitive, and we know that those are both important factors with nitrogen mineralization. So the work being done at University of Georgia, and then I think that in USDA ARS in Maryland, they're also doing similar work to make those mineralization models more temperature sensitive as well, or weather, temperature and moisture sensitive.
Super cool. Len, do you have any?
I would say we're in the era of integration of technologies. And I don't know if it's so much in partnering, but it's in incorporating technologies like better computer interfaces, better mapping skills, more interactive types of products. The current product line we're just about ready to launch would be our email push plant disease risk index models. So we've got about 8 or 9 of those. And you can now go to our registration page and sign up for the schedule. And so on your schedule, you get an email, the days of the week and the months of the year that you would like to see the plant disease indices that give you an idea about the potential for infection. So if you know you have inoculum, what does the weather tell us about the risk of infection for things like late blight of tomato, potato, apple scab, pear scab, all sorts of powdery mildews like in grapes and hops and strawberries and a few other crops. And so you can get all of these in a single report in your email on your specified schedule. And so rather than having to go to the website and remember once a week or twice a week, you can have it delivered to you. And so it's not a new idea, but it's a long time coming in terms of the technologies that we've been able to integrate. And so that's a big push right now, no pun intended. And but yeah, our work with other organizations is ongoing, and we have lots of partners. And over the years, we've had many, a lot of our partners are worried about and dealing with invasive species. And, it's not yet an IPM pest, but if we don't stop them from invading, they will become one, many of them. So that's where a lot of funding comes right now because of world travel and trade. The pressure from invasive species is, I would say, 10 to 30 times greater now than it was 25 years ago. It's just an incredible burden on our departments of agriculture and our extension system and the farmers once we get those pests.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine. I mean, obviously we're all experiencing globalization under COVID, but what a lot of people don't realize is all those same kind of systems that allow spread of disease are also like right up in there for weed, seeds, and insects.
Yeah. One other new project that I've fortunate to be collaborating with Doug Collins from Washington State University and Steve Hines from the University of Idaho, and Claire Sullivan, who's also at Oregon State University. We're beginning to conduct on-farm cover crop variety trials and develop evaluation criteria, and using each on-farm, the vision is that we'll use each on-farm trial as sort of one replicate, and we'll be able to develop online ways of sharing that data so that we can do test different cover crop varieties on farms in different regions and see how they perform, and either include or exclude certain farms to farms in a different area or in a different cropping system in your analysis. So it's kind of similar to some work that's being done with vegetable varieties. And it's very new project. We just got the grant last fall, so we're just starting it, but that, that could end up being another online decision tool, not necessarily related to weather data, but,
No,
crop
but that's one of these areas where I've seen digital support tools being very powerful, which is kind of benchmarking performance and or seeing what performance of a variety was in your locale, depending on how you define it, if it's your climate or your soil or proximity. And because it's so difficult to get information on performance of different varieties and cover crops. I mean, we've been approached at different times for people, like, not that we would know anything about cover crops really, but like there's a thirst for information on cover crops that I think is unmet.
Mm-hmm.
We're just about out of time, if not like beyond our allotted or promised scope. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up?
Well,
we're excited for crop time, and we're excited for weather-driven models, and for some of the partnerships that we're still evolving, and like with the National Phenology Network. So I think there's a lot of potential and a lot more adoption that we'd like to see.
Love it.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for inviting us. And Len and I are working, just finishing up a new extension publication about the crop time project. So hopefully that will be online. I don't know, what do you think, Len, by August or something?
I hope so. Yeah, we're waiting for the beans to grow, right?
Right, yeah, we need one more bean picture.
Nice. We'll be happy to promote it once it comes out. So thank you very much. And I encourage everybody to check out uspest.org to see the products of your fine work. So thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks, Adam.
All right. Ciao.
Bye.